Welcome to Socratic Stories, The Women Who Build. I'm Nicole Allos, founder of Socratic, and every week I sit down with a woman who's actively building something meaningful for conversation to highlight that in-between time when building something. So a career, an app, a company, building a family, because there's just as much value from my perspective in celebrating the build than just the polished result. So today's guest is Dr. Ann Welsh. She's a licensed clinical psychologist, executive coach who started her career at Harvard University Health Services and has spent nearly 2 decades helping working parents and women leaders thrive. She's based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, mother of four, and founder of a successful coaching and therapy practice. And she's also the creator of the Working Mothers Lifeline and the Ambitious Mothers Mastermind, an online group coaching program for working moms. And now she's putting everything she knows into a book launching this week on August 6th, Ambitious Mother: From Surviving to Thriving in Your Career and at Home, from Bloomsbury, with a foreword by Robin Arson, which is incredible. So welcome, Anne. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Anne and I have these sort of overlapping circles in a way. So I think we have sort of the DISC circle, we have the Center for Executive Coaching, as well as the Career Connection Summit in May as well. And it's been so great to see the impact that you're making on women. So at that summit, it was amazing to see how women were reacting to you and the impact that you had on kind of removing that feeling of guilt from going for what you want as a mom. So tell me a little bit more about what you're building right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny, right? We were just chatting before we signed on about building, and I am at this place where I think a lot of people look at me and see me as having built. I have a book, it's
Yeah.
releasing, just in a few days, and it looks like a finish line. And to me, it feels like a starting line. And I see this with my son. So I've got four kids, as you mentioned, and my oldest is 17, so he's going to be a senior. And
Okay.
he this summer is starting to work on college applications, and we're doing the tours, and he's starting to work on the essay. And I think there is this sense for him of like, he's in it. He's just in the muck of it, and it feels really tedious. And he's just trying to get to the finish line of like college acceptance, finish high school.
Yeah.
And as a parent, I'm sitting from the outside and seeing like, oh, no, this is just the beginning. This is the launch. And I think the book, as I was thinking about that, it's like the book is the same way. Like it feels to some extent like a finish line. And yet to me, it's been kind of like internal. And then next week, it's going to be external, and everybody gets a say about it. And whether or not I like what they have to say. And there's this moment of vulnerability here of like, are people going to resonate it in the way that I hope that they do? Um, but I think in terms of like what I'm building and what that next thing is then is really a conversation, right? I didn't write a book because I wanted to tell people what to do. And that's something I really had to grapple with as a coach, as a therapist. That's never my role, is to say, do X and your life will be better. Here's a spreadsheet, right? And so how do I write a book? Because I want to have a bigger impact, because I'm having very similar conversations with people over and over and over again, and also make it a conversation and not a dictate on how to live your life. And that was like in the writing process of something I really, really grappled with. And I hope that I did that successfully, and that really the book is the beginning of a conversation with individual readers, with workplaces, culturally across the board. And I've seen smatterings of that, right, in the Career and Care Connection Summit that we were both at, and some of my other speaking work. But there is this sense of, think I know what I'm building, and I'm on the cusp of about to see whether that actually plays out over the next couple of years.
I love that. And it's so interesting. Even in my mind, I said, "Oh my gosh, you have your book coming out. You know, you've built this, you've done all these things." And it was so interesting to get your perspective of, "Oh no. Oh no, this is just the beginning of, what will that reaction be about?" Can you talk a little bit about the book and what the premise is all about?
Yeah. So Ambitious Mother is a book for any woman that feels of any age that feels kind of torn between I want something for myself or I want a career and I also want to show up as a mom. And really, I think historically we paint those two things as being at odds with each other, that either you are good at your job and you're a bad mom, or you're a good mom and then you can't have much of a career. And I think that's where a lot of the guilt is coming from, right? Is this perception of if I'm giving to one, I'm robbing from the other. And the whole premise of the book is that, in fact, these things are like a Venn diagram with an overlap, and there's a lot of richness in the overlap, right? And again, coming from my background as a clinician, my whole world is talking about things as both and. It's never black and white for me. And so to take that approach to working motherhood and make a lot more space for richness and with that, hopefully ease some of the guilt. So the first part of the book talks about what's happened that's made working motherhood so hard. And I really look at the ways that we've escalated what we're asking of mothers, that we've escalated what we're asking of employees, and why it's almost hit this fever pitch recently. And then the second part of the book is talking about that overlap. And I call that part the motherhood advantage, which was the talk that I gave at the summit that we were at, really kind of turning on its head this idea that motherhood is bad for work and that work is bad for motherhood. And so I look at some of the research and some tools to help you think about how are these actually informing each other in a positive way. The third part is looking at kind of the internal work that we can do to address this issue. And so I talk about my model of healthy striving, right? We think of ambition as this kind of thing that's very blind, that we go after one thing with gusto, and usually that thing is money or power or status. And so I start to help people open up the aperture of what are you actually ambitious for? What is it that you actually want? And then how do you go after that in a sustainable way? And then the very last part is we can't do this alone, right? There are systems level things that are contributing here. So kind of connecting back to the beginning of the book. And so there's a chapter for workplaces on how they can do things differently to support working parents, and a chapter for men and male partners and male allies and how they can better support women and particularly working moms at home and at work. It was really important to me include both the individual and the system stuff. Again, coming from my background, I see both layers, and I wanted to make sure I addressed it both. It was perhaps a ambitious undertaking to try to do both of those things in one book, but I really think the system stuff needs to happen. And yet, if we only wait for the system stuff to happen, we're leaving women in the lurch. And so I wanted to be able to kind of address them together.
Yeah. And I love that it's such a holistic view where you're not just looking back and saying, oh, here's why we are where we are, but you're also not just focusing on, okay, what can organizations do and what can partners do? It sounds like leaving one out would not provide that successful view or that like honest view of what's happening. So I'm so excited to read that as well. So, obviously you have such a varied background and you have so many things you could probably write a book about, but why is this particular topic so important to you?
I think for, both for my clients and also a little bit for myself, right? So in terms of, I think it mostly initially came out of my clinical work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these conversations I'm having over and over and over again, not in a redundant way, but just I use the analogy of like, if you're a teacher and most of your class fails the test, a good teacher is going to look at the test or their teaching. They're going to say, maybe the test wasn't actually addressing what I taught, or maybe I taught something wrong. There must be an issue here.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of saying, oh, well, 90% of the class is just an idiot. And yet I think that's kind of been the approach that I'm seeing in the world, or at least I was seeing as I was writing it in the world of working motherhood, of everybody's seeing this as an individual failure to, quote, get it together or get organized or get up early enough or whatever it is for working motherhood. And I, from sitting in my chair, right, I'm saying, okay, this isn't just you. This is every single woman walking into my office. They're all coming in for the same reason.
Yeah.
And so it was really important to me to help women feel less alone in all of this and to recognize all of the reasons that they're feeling this way. And then I think there was, in hindsight, a little bit of like writing myself out of it too, because when I, was coming up, my first is, like I said, 17, my youngest is 10. And especially with my first, I had that same feeling of I am failing and I don't know how to do both of these things. And if I'm working as much as I am, maybe I'm not showing up as a parent the way I need to be, and feeling that same guilt and conflict and really needing to put in the self work to get out of it
Mm-hmm.
and find my own path there. And so I think there's a bit of like, this is my journey, but also it's not one size fits all. It's here's the journey of lots of different women. And that was actually my favorite part of the book, was specifically interviewing women for the book about how their motherhood has fueled their careers, and getting to hear all of these amazing stories.
I love that. And if you think about it, right, you have this experience with executive coaching, so in the business world, and you have this clinical experience, then you have this lived experience. And even you, with all of this experience, it sounds like you had to still do the work to make sure that you had this perspective that was fair to yourself and fair to all the things you're trying to accomplish. So it's like, even with all of that, I think it gives the rest of us some hope in that, okay, it's not just us. And, resources like this, I think, can be incredibly powerful, which is great.
Yeah, a very quick funny story about that, just to let people know.
Yeah.
Even now, I struggle. I'm going to be traveling a lot over the next 2 months to promote the book, and I historically don't do a ton of travel for work. And I said something to my husband about a smattering of guilt of leaving him with the kids or whatever, and he said to me, "Anne, have you read your own book?" I was like, right, this is okay.
Yeah. I mean, but I think that's what makes that the story and the narrative so much more powerful, that it's like, it's not like you were saying, it doesn't sound like it's binary. I know we got connected because I was trying to figure out how can I continue to grow my business while making sure that my son, who I, was homeschooling, like how can I make it work? And so I just find it so ironic that, like, all this time later, not that long, but now that we're talking about this, and even as you're going on your book tour, it's like, okay, how can I make this work? So that's incredible. I have to ask though, how, like, that's amazing that you have Robin doing the forward. And I saw some posts that you're a big Peloton fan, right? So how has sort of that physical activity, or like that piece of it, fueled what you're working on right now?
Yeah, it's funny. I was not like an exercise person as a kid. I joke that I was the captain of my varsity volleyball team in high school, because the varsity volleyball team had like 15 people on it. Like, I went to a very small high school, so it was not exactly like a huge feat. Um, and I really didn't, I fell in love with yoga in graduate school. And for me, that was like my entry into movement. Like, this is something that I would choose to do. But I didn't really do anything other than yoga until COVID hit. And I happened to buy a Peloton from my husband for his 40th birthday, which was like right in those early throes of COVID. And it really changed things for both of us. And now he is a huge endurance athlete and is doing these crazy, 200-mile bike rides. And I've really fallen in love with strength training as well as the bike. And so, every morning I start out with some sort of movement. My kids are old enough that I can do that before they get up. That would not have been the case when they were little, but that's where the season that I'm in now. But I think for me, movement has been the thing that gets me out of my head every day. I'm very, very cerebral. I can be stuck in thought mode all day long. There's not like quiet unless I seek it intentionally. And movement is that place where I get it in the mornings. And, particularly with Robin's rides, ever since she agreed to do the forward, I feel like I get on the bike and I'm like having a little bit of a pep talk, not only about the ride, but about this very long endurance journey of not only writing the book, but of publishing it and getting it into the hands of readers, because writing it is only part of it. And for me, that was the easier part. It is the selling it and the marketing and all of the rest of it that's much more challenging.
Yeah. So how long have you been writing this book, or where did it start from conception to now?
I would say, it started conception wise, probably again during COVID, like in that first 2 years in terms of like smattering of sentences that were kind of percolating in my head. And I really dismissed it for probably years, right? Of just like, if I were to write a book, this is what it would be about, or this would be a sentence or a paragraph, but never actually taking pen to paper. To the power of coaching, it wasn't really until I voiced the idea to my own coach of like, hey, I have this kind of silly idea. Maybe I'd want to write a book and I'd probably just self-publish it. And she was like, let's
Yeah.
talk about this more. And I was like, no, like this sound, and kind of was very, very encouraging. I mean, we talk a lot about borrowed confidence with your coach. And like, this is a place where I really had to borrow her confidence to feel like this is something I could do. But like once pen to paper started to now, it's probably 2 years or 3 years. They've all blended, but 2 to 3 years, kind of depending on how you count.
That's incredible. And so what was that moment, if you were thinking about this for a while and then you had those coaching conversations, was there a sort of pivotal moment that you're like, now I'm going to start, or now I'm going to take that first step?
Was a pivotal moment. And it's funny, right? Thinking about building. I think early in my life, certainly pre-kids, I was very much always going after a thing. There was always like get into med school, which I then turned down, but then get into graduate school, get the job at Harvard, right? Like get a good
Yeah.
internship, all like chasing a thing. And when I left Harvard, I think there was a huge shift in terms of how I approached career that I didn't know at the time, that was much more about like, maybe I'll try this. Let's see what this
Yeah.
feels like. And that's really been my whole career. And so I think even with the book, I don't know that I knew I was writing it until I was writing it. It was like, well, let me just put together an outline. What would that feel like? Let me just
Okay.
write the chapter. Okay, well, now what would a proposal be and how would I write that? Let me get some help and let me just see if I can get an agent. And it's just been this like literal one step at a time. I haven't been able
Yeah.
to think too far ahead. And I think maybe what feels particularly vulnerable thinking about building right now is like there is kind of like a wish list goal, but it's not really one I get to have control over, right? I mean, everyone wants to hit a best sellers list, but there's so much outside of my control between now and then. And I've kind of like turned over every stone that I can think of, but that doesn't mean it's enough. Like I might have done all this and I might not get that goal. And that doesn't mean it wasn't worth writing the book and that it won't have an impact and it won't be important. But
Yeah.
like there is still part of me that wants that external validation piece. Like it's very human. And I just have to sit with the uncertainty for now.
Right. That you've worked so hard over these past couple years, and kind of, it sounds like iteration of like, let me just dip my toe in the water and then, okay, that works kind of thing. So that was actually going to be my next question, was like, what is your ultimate goal and dream with this book? Is it to hit the New York Times bestseller list?
I wouldn't even go that far because I think for anyone that wants the inside scoop on book publishing, I could fill in more detail later. That could be a whole other podcast. That's a curated list. So it's not just based on sales. And it has something to
Okay.
do, a little bit to do with specific stores in the New York area and editorial choice and all sorts of things. So,
Mhm.
but even just to hit the USA Today bestsellers list, I would love to, but I don't know that I'll sell enough books. So I'll put that out there for your listeners, right? Here's something I'm trying and I don't know that it's going to work out. But beyond that, because that's just really a small, like almost vanity metric,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I want the book. It's two things. One is I want the book to be a conversation that keeps happening, right? I don't want it to end. I don't want this to be the end. I want this to be the beginning, and I want it to have an impact. I want readers to feel like they pick it up and they exhale because they finally have permission to think about what it is that they want. And I want them to pass it along to their friends. And outside the book, in terms of my work, I think one thing that, especially in the past year, as I've had to become more visible and as AI has shaped everything, I've really been doing a lot of work around kind of humanity in the workplace and humanity in leadership. And I think what feels like the next thing I'm building or my next iteration here is really wanting to be like a thought partner and advisor to leaders and leadership teams that is the person gets kind of quietly recommended because they know that I will help them hold their vision and help them grow, but also hold their humanity and see them as whole people. And that's very similar to the work I do with working mothers, but maybe more broadly in terms of leadership and shaping workplaces around this too.
I love that. So are you thinking in more general terms from a leadership standpoint, or is it taking that part of your book where you're talking about systems approach of what could this mean in the workforce specific to mothers?
I think a little of both and, right? I think so much, a lot of the conversations I'm having these days is how the things that I have advocated for working moms benefit everybody, right? Like we are actually all better off if we are allowed to have lives outside of work. And sometimes it feels like the way AI is moving, it's like someone's pressing the up button on the treadmill for all of us, of like we're just expected to do more with less time rather than it actually taking any work off our plates. And so really like thinking about, wouldn't all workplaces be better if there was room for that humanity? And let's bring what we know from the psychology data, from cognitive psychology, from learning theory, from organizational psychology, and actually apply it to workplaces and leadership. But I think doing it in this very human conversational way, which is where I really love.
I love that so much. And I think it combines all the things that you're doing in such a important way. And that's kind of the space that I'm in at the corporate level with C-level execs and founders, and being able to, change workplaces in that way. I mean, how incredible would that be? So what have you learned so far from a book writing standpoint that might help some of the listeners who might have that same dream?
Well, that's a great question. Again, that could be like a whole 20-minute episode. I think the thing is, it's a long journey, but if you can find a way to enjoy it, then it's worth it. And I don't know if I would have even said, I think I had a question of, is this worth it at different points of time, but I am glad that I did it. I loved writing it. My like introverted soul was in heaven in some ways, right? With the excuse of like having all my research papers printed out and jotting down clinical stories and that headspace was quite fun for me. And this other part of selling and marketing the book has been maybe a little less fun, but I will say, again, as someone who's pretty introverted, it's really forced me out of my shell a bit. And I've done some personal growth work around visibility. And I've also connected with amazing people, which I don't think I would have done without it. And so from that standpoint alone, it feels worth it. So I guess it's a long-winded way of saying there's going to be part of it that you love. Like with any job, anything we do, there'll be part of it really fills and you love, and there'll be part of it that's hard. And if we can allow the part of it that's hard to be the place where we grow, then it's a worthwhile endeavor.
Absolutely. And I'm so excited to see how many women and how many lives that you're able to touch because you pushed through these last 3 years, and you're pushing through this like, hey, I'm marketing a book. I've never done this before. So I don't know, I'm incredibly excited for you too. So what asks do you have of the community? What can we do to support what you're doing right now?
Yeah. I mean, my big one right now is buy the book, buy it for your friends, buy it for working moms, buy it for your HR head, right? Earmark the chapter on how workplaces can help. And if you happen to be in Boston specifically, I have a launch party on August 6th that people can join me at, and I would love to see folks there. But I have a tour, so I'll be in a couple other cities. I'll be in New York and Raleigh and Philadelphia all over the next month or so as well.
Very cool. I'm in Philly, so I will definitely find time to see you for that as well. So Anne, thank you so much. I'm so grateful you took the time out of your busy time and book tour to spend time with us. Ambitious Mother comes out on August 6th, but you don't have to wait to support it. You can pre-order it now through Barnes & Noble, Amazon, or you can request it from your local bookstore. And you can also connect with Anne on LinkedIn, as well as we'll share the link here. And on Building Things That Matter, you'll be able to get all of the links and all the ways that you can support her as well. So thank you so much for spending time with us.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Great. Well, this is definitely a build worth talking about, and we'll definitely follow and through the next few months. So take care. Thank you.